The idea that the white man is all powerful is something that our country has been founded on. Women have faced oppression in ways that include not being able to vote, to own land, to practice law, or what they can wear. Although times have changed, there are still challenges that face us. Women are too often sexualized in schools, and a particular experience that I recall was whenever I was a freshman in high school and my principal called me down to the office, which interrupted my education, to be told that I was being distracting to my male peers. It's time that we change this sexist narrative that girls are not as deserving of an education as boys are because of what they wear. In the 2017-2018 school year, 46.2% of elementary schools, 61.6% of middle schools, and 55.9% of high schools enforce a strict dress code according to the National Center of Education Statistics. The dress code has an underlying motive for targeting women. The realization and retaliation of the sexist dress code was manufactured to target women and instill gender conformity based on societal standards and has needed to be distinguished since its creation. In the 1920s, women were forced to wear corsets as a part of the dress code. It was mandatory, but not in the way that you would think. Women at this time were forced to wear corsets to flatten their chests to be less distracting to their male peers. How can a school fight to restrict the developmental process of a woman going through puberty? This is just one example of how dress codes have targeted women since the beginning. In the 1930s, the basic idea around clothing stayed the same. A-line skirts were still very much in, except they were now allowed to wear ankle socks instead of stockings. And this was considered a huge breakthrough for women at this time because they could finally show off a little bit of skin. In the 1940s, women were expected to wear long A-line skirts still. No pants were allowed whatsoever. It was something foreign to them. According to the article, the girl suspended for wearing pants in New York City, 1942, Paul Sorin states, there was one case in 1942 at Abraham High School. Student Beverly Berenstein protested her school dress code by wearing slacks and a sweater to class, and she was promptly suspended. And here you can see her friends protesting in solidarity the next day wearing slacks. Beverly wanted to be able to express herself that was not considered something like traditionally feminine in the 1940s, and people were starting to become aware of the underlying motive of the sexist dress code and how it was made to target women. Next, we enter the 1950s. A-line skirts were still mandatory. Fashion at this time brought a lower neckline outside of school, but of course in school, the dress code ruled that the neckline had to go all the way to the base of the neck and nothing below was to be seen. In the 1960s, maxi skirts were all the rage, and these were skirts that went all the way to the floor, like touched the ground. The dress code rules that the skirts were almost equally as distracting as short skirts, which is absurd to me. In the 1970s, Title IX was created to protect people from discrimination based on sex and education programs or activities that receive financial assistance and went into full effect on July 1st, 1972. Although Title IX does not directly talk about dress code, this is still a huge step for women in the education environment to receive equality, and this does come full circle into present day. Stated on page 1 of a self-study guide to sexism in schools created by the Pennsylvania Department of Education in 1974, sexism is both an attitude and a way of behaving. It consists of arbitrarily assigning certain traits and abilities solely based on one sex, regardless of their attributes as individuals. It is important to note that this book was originated and prepared by the Education Committee of Pennsylvania for Women's Rights. And in the 1970s, girls were restricted to blouses, and skirts were still worn. Men could not wear jewelry of any sorts, and according to Patty English from the article Young Fashion and Public Dress Code of the 1960s and 70s, men's hair was required to be cut to the ear. This is a prime example of men getting a taste of exactly what women went through by enacting this dress code. It is apparent that gender conformity was the norm and did not allow either gender to express themselves. There was a retaliation of these standards. In 1971 at North Bergen High School, a walkout for the dress code occurred. According to Outrage and Rebellion in the 1970s dress code, Zichronaut states about 300 students had walked out of school and I was one of them. Since I was on lunch break, I had no problem, to be honest. Some parents arrived to tell their children to go back to school, while others were there to support their children's civil disobedience. 2 months later, on January 4th, 1972, the results of the survey were in the school paper. It was excellent for the students, as of 74% of the residents favored a change. Boys could now wear dress shirts with or without a tie, and girls were finally allowed to wear slacks. In the 1980s, collarbones were finally allowed to be seen. T-shirts were now allowed, and of course, the 80s are known for like neon and brighter colors, so this allowed for brighter things to be worn and more self-expression. In the 1990s, exposed stomachs and shorter skirts were in outside of school, but of course these items were not allowed to be worn in school because of the dress code. In the 2000s, mini skirts were finally allowed, and some schools allowed girls to wear them as long as they touched their fingertips, as long as their skirts came to their fingertips. And this is a huge step compared to the 1920s, because we can finally see the abolishment of the sexist dress code. In the 2010s, overall, the dress code has changed a lot for the better by this time period. Girls are seen now wearing pants. Some schools allow exposed midriffs, but one thing that stood out to me was that women were expected to wear bras, and if not, they were sent home. But of course, it doesn't matter if men's nipples are seen. Now we enter present day. Many trends from the past decades are coming back into popularity, and according to Richard Thompson Ford in the book, Dress Codes and How the Laws of Fashion Made History, he states that fashion offers endless opportunities for resistance and the subversive recycling of old symbols for new purposes, which in turn inspires a new generation of dress codes. This meaning that every time there will be a new fashion trend, of course, dress codes in schools are going to step in to stop self-expression and instill sexism. In 2019, a federal court ruled that a K-8 public charter school uniform policy violates the Constitution by requiring female students to wear skirts to school and prohibiting them from wearing pants or shorts, according to American Civil Liberties Union. This is a huge step to previous eras, and we can see that Title IX was being violated, and the outcry against sexist ideals and gender conformity are apparent. As the former editor-in-chief of Vogue, Dana Vreeland states, "Fashion is a part of the daily era and it changes all the time. You can even see the approaching revolution of clothing. You can see and feel everything in clothes, and I could not agree more." Although many of the rules of dress codes have changed, there's still an underlying motive of sexism towards girls. When dress codes promote sexist ideals toward women and gender conformity, how are we expected to express ourselves? Thank you.